Hi, everybody. I'm John Kraska, Executive Director for Every Library and the Every Library Institute. Thank you tonight for being part of this conversation. Censored Authors Speak. It's the middle of National Library Week 2022, and there's a lot of negative things happening in libraries right now, alongside a lot of lovely positive things. There's beautiful stories about how libraries are transforming lives and building communities, and in schools, they're supporting kids. And yet, there's some significant vectors of attack on our public institutions as public libraries, the structure of our communities, our government, and the nature of public education as well. Folks, we wanted to bring together some voices that are well, they're facing some silencings, which is not an appropriate way for us to meet them tonight. I didn't want to meet these good people tonight for the first time in some cases in this kind of a circumstance. And yet, it's important for us to help surface and celebrate the stories that they're trying to tell and to tell some truths about what's going on in our country right now. There's two very competitive philosophies of government. One where there's perhaps a progressive tax policy that funds the common good, a progressive approach to education that looks at students and families as enabled to learn with enabling support. And then there's another form of government philosophy. There's another form of education philosophy that I don't fully understand. But as a political action committee for libraries here at Every Library, and as a public policy, tax policy think tank for libraries here at the Every Library Institute, we wanted to bring some folks together and have this deep conversation. It's my pleasure tonight to introduce first our moderator, and then she will bring in the rest of the panel, Dr. Tasslyn Magnusson, who's a colleague of ours. She's an independent researcher. She has done some extraordinary work to, well, not just hear about book bans and book challenges, but to do a lot of independent discovery and research, the unearthing of that other perspective on government, on society that I don't totally understand. It's a really exciting opportunity for me to bring Tasslyn in right now and to welcome you as our moderator tonight, and then as you can welcome the panel. So, Tasslyn, please.
Hello. It's great to be here tonight. I think that we should just put the whole panel up so we can be in our squares. Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad you could be here. I'm very much looking forward to the conversation about books and your stories and what's been happening. We don't have a lot of time and we have lots to talk about. So we are going to dive right in. And I guess the first thing that I'm curious about is like, what are you seeing with banning or censorship? And how has it impacted your work? And like, Ashley, do you want to jump in?
I'm usually the first volunteer, so I'm stunned to be called on. I think that the last year has been a really devastating one for teachers, librarians, students, and their allies, who are those of us who write for young people. And I've been in this unpleasant conversation since February of 2021, when Leander ISD caved to a group of right-wing radicalized parents who were demanding that they reverse the efforts to diversify the choice reading lists for student book clubs. And that really set a template for what we have seen in the year since for these bulk book bans, where many books were being targeted all at once. And often the lists of books look very similar to the kinds of lists that librarians and educators create to diversify collections. And we have heard over and over claims that this is about sexual content, quote unquote, pornography, which, as we all know, there is no school library in the country that has any porn. So this conflation of sexual content of any kind with pornography has been a real strong strategy. And also, it's obvious when you look at which are the books that get targeted, that the choice of books has nothing to do with sexual content, because we could stack up books with sexual content in any high school library, and the tallest stack by far would be books that feature white middle-class characters, straight characters. So we are learning increasingly how these groups operate, how they recruit parents to be the face of their efforts to not only restrict kids' access to books, but to signal their disapproval of certain identities and to claim who gets to matter in that community. And we're going to see more and more of it, I'm afraid. So I'll stop with that.
Thanks. Andrew, do you want to jump in as an editor and kind of give us your thoughts?
I've been a book editor for 20 years, and book banning is till this point has been like weather. Every once in a while, something would come in, and much like weather, it would pass. What's happening now is climate change. It is to a degree I've never seen. It's made me re-examine a lot of my thoughts. Like, I'm somewhat ashamed now to say that, like, I was once upon a time rather dismissive, like, oh, a book ban is free publicity. No, it's not. It was wrong when I said that years ago, and it is emphatically not true now. Everything that Ashley said is how it appears to us from the inside, that and it seems so eerily coincident with the industry itself having a real sincere reckoning with internalized racism, homophobia, all of the prejudices that are structural in publishing are under the microscope in a way that I'm proud of. There's a lot of work to be done, but this sort of mirror image quality, like all the work that we're doing on one end, sometimes to see it like literally countered and undone, it's surreal, and it's a challenging time in publishing now because of the pandemic. So to have this at the same time, and then to see the impact on authors, and on their morale, on their creative time, the kind of way it forces authors to become advocates, and to do political work rather than to make art, especially in a time when authors are less able to be in schools than they are normally. Climate change is a big deal, but I think this feels like that. This feels like that kind of seismic change that's impacting education, libraries, and all of it. So it's bad, real bad.
How about anyone else want to jump in?
Yeah, I would love to add on to what Andrew and Ashley said too, and also make it clear, like, this isn't new. It's been happening for a long time. I've talked about it with Alex on panels before as well. My first book, Anger is a Gift, was banned for the first time about a week after it came out. So I think any of us who are queer, who are people of color, who are non-binary, trans, we're sort of used to this, and that our books just existing means that they get challenged. It's just, now it has reached this fever pitch. I tweeted about this earlier this year too, but one of the things that I started seeing was getting school visits canceled. Like, they were booked, and then as this, interest in book banning and book challenging has gained momentum, I started actually losing jobs. Things that were sometimes in, contracted gigs where I'm being paid to show up to do this thing. And then having to, getting an email from an administrator or librarian or an educator about, we can't let this happen. It either is going to violate district policies, or I'm going to get in trouble. I might lose my job, which, none of us want the educators or, the administrators or teachers to be, at risk of losing their job. So it's a combination of that. And then also, on a personal level, just the absurdity of it. I have had my books targeted for sexual content, even though a thing that I've actually literally had people criticize is that I don't have sex scenes in my books. So it's wild that that is the reason that they're being banned, is for being sexually explicit. Of course, I'm not naive. I know what it is. I'm an openly queer person. My identity is immediately sexualized by countless people, whatever. But I think one of the even weirder ways it's been manifesting is how many books are being targeted by, this right-wing fascist obsession with critical race theory, by people who can't actually define what critical race theory is at all or where it came from. A great example of that is my second book, Each of Us a Desert, was removed from a high school because it is a book that talks about racism. My second book is a fantasy, and the great thing that, it's that evidence that, it's clear you didn't read this. There's no race in that book at all. Like, it's a fantasy world with no race. There's not racism discussed once in the entire book. But I think the fact that this is a book that centers and is concerned with telling the story of basically a fantasy analog of Latino people, brown and black Latino people, the fact that someone doesn't see themselves immediately thinks it's a book about racism, which, like, part of me is like real petty and is like, welcome to my whole life, like where I had to imagine myself in books. So yeah, it's frustrating. It's frustrating and demoralizing, but I think many of us will also speak, and I'd love to hear from the others too, like, it is certainly not changing how I'm writing books. I think I was a lot more reluctant to do certain things, like, have F-bombs in books, and I think I certainly didn't write sex scenes because I knew that would be targeted, and I was going to be writing about heavy things anyway. And now I'm just like, oh yeah, I don't care. These are just gonna get, worse and worse. I am going to write the art that I want to see put out into the world.
Yeah, to tag on what Mark just said, they're searching for things. So if I try to get rid of things, they'll just search for other things, and the search gets sillier. So if they're going to try to hold me back, why would I do the same? And I want to open up the thought of this, that this is part of a larger pushback. This is part of more things going on. It did not fix everything, but we had our first Black president in 2008. It did not fix everything, but gay marriage was legalized in 2015. Books like my book, Melissa, middle grade book about a trans kid, would have never been banned 15 years ago because it wouldn't have existed. So the fact that our books are being fought at in the public domain means that change has happened in the publishing domain and in the library domain, such that these books exist. And now it's becoming a real part of, like, what is being banned is always part of what people are afraid of in this country and what people are afraid of changing in this country. And that's absolutely evident of what's going on here.
I think what's been startling, I mean, I've seen my books challenged since about 2016, which was when I published a book about LGBTQ pride, and I think my first book challenge came within like a couple months of that book being released. So it's happened a number of times over the years, but I think what we're seeing now, just the level of organization and what a large movement this is, the amount of funding behind it, and this sort of larger backlash that it seems like it's part of is really disturbing. But I would echo what Mark said in terms of it's not changing what I write. And in fact, when my first book about Pride came out, I had very deliberately written that book as a book that I wanted to be available as a resource in schools. So I tried very hard to make that book the kind of book that you could really only object to by saying, I'm objecting to this because I'm homophobic or transphobic, and the pushback about that book, in part, because it's a middle grade book, was that these topics are not appropriate for middle grade age kids. And in part, my response to that was to write a board book, you know, and a picture book, because there is no age. You know, I'm a parent. You know, I had a kid with two moms and couldn't find books with families that looked like ours when he was really little. So for people to come to me saying this isn't appropriate for children is absurd, you know? So yeah, so it hasn't changed what I write. If anything, I would say it makes me more determined to write the books I want to write, but it does make me concerned. It's a strange feeling to be writing a book and thinking, you know, this book is not going to be in schools in Florida or in Texas or in, you know, and to be writing with that at the back of your mind. It's not stopping me from writing them, but it's a strange place to be in, for sure.
I would say, going back to this idea that Alex was saying about how the fact that our books are even available to be censored is a move in the right direction, by saying that, unlike all of you guys who you know, don't feel like you're going to change at all what you write, I think that I've always censored myself in very many ways. For instance, when I wrote None of the Above, I knew at that time there was that sort of sense that books could be, quote, too diverse. Remember, this is 2013 when, you know, Melinda Lowe actually like brought up book reviews of people of books written by people of color, and reviewers would actually talk about there being an, quote, unrealistic amount of diversity or unrealistically diverse population. And so I deliberately whitewashed my first book, you know, because I mean, if I had an intersex main character, of course it couldn't be an intersex person of color. And so what all of this has done is that it's revealed to me all of the ways that I've suppressed myself. And it's shown a reflection of, to me, of how I can do better. And I have to admit, you know, initially I remember, you know, thinking it was a badge to be on the Krauss list, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, I remember very vividly my very first, the first time I was uninvited from a school visit in Tennessee, the year None of the Above came out, and Adam Silvera was on a panel with me, and the location of our school visit changed at the last minute on the last day. And it was only afterwards, through digging, that we were able to even have it acknowledged that there was an issue. But the censorship levels, the soft censorship of all of our books, I think, has been there from day one, not only from schools, but from librarians who don't stock our books, or who feel that our books, you know, wouldn't land very well in their population. It happens when parents walk into a bookstore, you know, and this is something that I, as a parent, have actively. You have to be very intentional about what you buy. I mean, I think it was Jason Lee once said that, you know, book buying is a political act, and understanding that as a parent has worked wonders for me, and I am so proud to say, and proud to be able to tell you, Alex, that, you know, Melissa, when I gave it to my 8-year-old, was like a transformative book. And they came out as non-binary last year. So the fact that we can even be in a place where my kid can be outraged that your book was banned is a step forward. But it's something that I sort of hate, the fact that I'm still censoring myself, and that that censoring is sort of a latent thing in a lot of people's minds, and that we often aren't aware of our own biases. But having this conversation allows us to go beyond that, and to realize that we can all do better, whether, you know, we're a librarian, a teacher, a parent, and certainly an author too.
Thank you. This is really really important conversations to be having. Have you all lost gigs in schools because of books? I mean, I know it's happening.
I might have the unique position of losing one in the middle of a visit. I was in Illinois, and in the middle of a visit, a teacher who was invited to a group school visit, this was in early 2019, and no one had prompted her about who I was or what I was doing. And I do, you know, and I love that you talk about this, Eileen, about self-censoring, because I think as much as I want my books to be radical, I have absolutely self-censored as well about thinking like, is this too much or whatnot? But I think there's also a way that I wrote my books. They're unmistakably about queer people of color. There's no way to not bring that up in talking about them. And I did that on purpose so that you couldn't deny what they were about, which also means that when I do school visits, there's no way to really, I have to come out every single time, you know, and it's a thing that I talk about, like, hi, you're a bunch of strangers, I'm coming out to you, and talking about how that is a continual act. And so I'm doing this, I do my presentation, and I had the teacher realize like what was happening. And in the middle of a question where a student just wanted to know how to write romance, and I was talking about the romance between two characters, and the teacher interrupted to be like, I just want to remind you that we need to keep it PG. And I was like, well, we are. There's nothing here that can't be seen in a Disney movie, even though none of this would be seen in a Disney movie. There's nothing outside of this. And she did that multiple times until after that was over, she had me escorted out of the building. And so, I mean, here, I still got paid. So, you know, her loss, whatever. But I mean, so again, it's a thing where this is sometimes happening on a level. And I love that you brought up that it's happening almost, there's a lot of quiet and like, what was the word that you used?
Soft censorship.
Yes, soft censorship. Thank you. Because that is happening too. I mean, I wouldn't use that example of soft. That's very direct, hard censorship. But I have found that my book is on a number of lists. It was on a couple of the big lists in Texas, but a lot of what is happening is school districts that are censoring, you know, the books that are available, but not publicizing it. There aren't school board meetings. There aren't things where parents can, you know, offer their opinion. They're just doing it. And I'm getting emails from teachers and librarians that are like, hey, I was teaching your book this year and I can't, and I don't know what I could do. And they're asking me for advice. And I'm like, I don't know either. Like, I don't, you know, because you don't want to put them at risk. You don't want to promote it as well. So yeah, it's happening on multiple fronts and in multiple ways. And I think it is also important, like you said, like, this conversation needs to be had, and I don't want to lose the nuance that the censorship is happening at different levels and for different reasons, you know. And also, I mean, Ashley's, we have a little chat that it's also a proxy for a greater culture war that is happening. Well, there's a reason they're doing this. There's a reason they're talking about us as groomers and pedophiles on purpose. They're doing, it's my whole childhood all over again. Like, I feel like I'm in a circle and we're repeating everything that I heard as a kid. And so it's just wild that it's coming back up again. But I think that means that we have to be cognizant of it so that we can respond in ways to counter these sort of narratives.
I think that my books and my existence as a writer is so obviously and undeniably queer and trans that I have not been uninvited from an event. But there's lots of mid-list authors I know who are very, very busy. And I am not. And people contact them, they're like, oh my gosh, you must have, like, do you have any availability in your schedule? I'm like, oh yeah. I mean, if it's not a librarian conference or it's not like some special like hippy dippy school, no, I'm generally just not invited in the first place. And you can't count that. That's part of the soft censorship. You can't count when people don't put your books out face forward, or they don't have it at all, or they put it behind like a special vacation section where you need like special permissions to go on a trip to get it, or whatever bananas language they use around keeping information about the world from young people. Which, I know this isn't what your question, but the heart of this is that we end up with young people who either don't see themselves, and therefore the road back from that is hard and long, and you don't come back unscarred, or you don't see others. And so then as an adult, you're not prepared to respond and react when you meet people who are of all sorts of what. And that puts those marginalized people at further risk.
I wanted to jump in. I think that was incredibly well put. And I think that this is one of our core, I think, opportunities in speaking very broadly to parents. Because I recognized in going through this, book banning is forefront in my mind, and it's been there for a year. Most parents, even in places where this is happening, that's simply not the case. They have other things on their mind. But most of them want their kids to succeed, and they recognize that the 21st century requires a different skill set from the 19th century. And what Alex was talking about is actually at the core. And I try to shift the conversation away from this or that book or this or that kind of experience represented in a book and say, hey, do you want your kids to be prepared for college, for professional life, for living with and loving the people they are actually going to encounter in the life ahead of them? And if you want that for them, they need access to all kinds of stories. I think it's a winning message when we talk about how these actions, not only is it a detriment to students' education when we take away books like the ones that are vanishing rapidly from library shelves, but also what happens when school leaders allow teachers and librarians to be positioned as the enemy. And when that happens in a community, the quality of education across the board, we're not just talking about language arts, is negatively impacted. And so I think reframing some of the issues as issues of what do you want for your child's education, and what do you want their librarian to be doing? Helping them find the resources they need for their research paper, connecting them with the book that's going to ignite a love of reading for them, or spending hours combing through databases to flag the books that some politician said they have to flag.
Yeah, if I can jump in on that, because I think Ashley really succinctly articulated the kind of positive message for this for parents who are just encountering this or broadsided by it. And I think another thing that you can say about this, rather than defending individual books, which I think is kind of a fool's errand in this moment, because they're just lying about the books, and you, in defending the individual book, you are almost obligated to repeat the lie. So if I have to talk about, for example, about Amaya Kobebe's amazing memoir Genderqueer, I talk about the ending of that book, which is incredible. Like, here is a book about a non-binary person, and the last words are about how much he loves her parents. Like, it is tremendously moving. I will talk like that. And then to continue the conversation, on the other hand, to believe the charges against books like Genderqueer or Out of Darkness or any of or Melissa or any of these books requires you to believe in a vast conspiracy theory to distribute pornographic materials under cover of multiple professional organizations through one of the most notoriously underfunded and underpaid, like, it's Pizzagate level thinking. It's actually wilder. Like, at least the people that everybody believed were doing terrible things in the basement of a pizzeria that didn't have a basement were all rich people. Like, this requires you to believe that librarians are in on something incredibly sinister. And who do you want to align with? I really think one of the insidious parts of this is that thing I said earlier, that book bans have a quality of weather, that they've just been around for a long time. And once upon a time, a book ban meant somebody went into a library and was looking for a Booth Tarkington book and found Kurt Vonnegut and freaked out because of his creative use of an asterisk or something like that. That's not what this is. This isn't about a person who reads books objecting to something in a book. This is about people who don't read books, who don't care about books, seeing books as a convenient place to activate a larger movement. And I think we have to repeat that over and over again, because that's true. Again, that is a real easy argument to make. Like, you don't have to be an incredibly sophisticated political observer to see that. And no, let the books be books.
Yeah, that brings up something really interesting that I would love you guys to talk a little bit more about, is sort of how do we unpack the misconceptions about the banning that's happening. There is, I think we've mentioned it a couple times, the myth that it's going to bring you loads of dollars. Well, in my research, I think I have like 2,000 books now logged, and possibly close to 1,000 separate authors who have been banned somewhere in the United States or challenged, or, and that's just the stuff that we can document. That's not any of the soft censorship that we've all been talking about.
Yeah. I can certainly speak a little bit to the sales effect of bans. I've had the misfortune of having a number of books I've published, so I see this banned. Bans are all publicity is good publicity, but the best publicity is the publicity that you can plan for, and you can have books out there. So if by going after books that are backlist titles, books that are circulating well in libraries but may not be in every Barnes and Noble in America, when all of a sudden it's splashed across headlines, it doesn't move the needle very often. It will move the needle for a book that is already selling well, or a book that a lot of people have a connection to. I think you can say that was true with Mouse. Like, people have ideas about that book that was like that connected in that way, and that activated a lot of enthusiasm for people to go buy it, and they were able to meet the demand. That is exceptional. That's not how it normally happens. Much more often, they've gone after a book that is doing the work that most books do, which is circulating occasionally in libraries, being bought every once in a while. They're not out there stacked up in Costco. And all of a sudden, there's a flurry of information about it that is mostly lies. And the book isn't out there in such force that it can counteract the lies. So if people want to actually go buy it and find out they can't get it, it's been pulled off library shelves. It's truly a disaster for most books. Like, there's no circumstance under which I would wish for a ban. It's just never worth it. And the psychic, I'm not even speaking to the psychic cost to the authors.
I think that it is really a flashy headline to say books banned in Florida, Texas, Mississippi, whatever state you expect. First of all, it happens all over the place. It happens in the suburbs of Chicago. It happens in Seattle. It happens all sorts of places. And it's not as black and white as there was a ban. There was a challenge, which often comes from one person who may or may not have children at the school, who may or may not have any connection to the district. Someone put up a sink. That's officially a challenge. What happens after that changes so much based primarily on whether there's a policy in place. If the school or library has a policy that is used and addressed, that's when you have a better shot of things going, because it's not about the book, it's about the process. When there's no process, that's when it becomes about the book. That's when it becomes about the person defending the book. That's when all of this stuff can so easily snowball. So not that it's not snowballing, it is snowballing. And Tasslyn just said here, 38 states so far on their list. So like, that is all over the place. And the policy does not always get followed. But it's also not something that is out of nowhere. And it is not something that is uncounterable. It is something that we need to counter, because right now it is a tidal wave. And if you don't respond to a tidal wave, then you're underwater.
I would love to see, oh, sorry, can I just say something? I would love to see the bar for somebody to challenge a book set a little higher. I have a book about abortion rights, which was just challenged in a public library, and somebody sent me a copy of the challenge form that a community member had filled in. And their objection to the book was literally one line. It just said, endorses killing babies. Like, that was their objection. So they haven't read the book. It's a book about abortion rights. That's why they're objecting to it. I was talking to a friend at a library, at another library, who was saying that for someone to challenge a book at their public library, there's a sort of 5 to 7 page form they have to fill in, highlighting what particular things they're objecting to, on what grounds, and so on. So they actually have to read the book and think about it and put some effort into complaining. They can't just put in 100 complaints about 100 different books, copy pasting the same objection to all of them. And I think that to me makes a lot of sense, that when libraries are looking at their policies, that set the bar just a little bit higher for people to be able to challenge.
It should be as hard to get a book out of a library as it was to get it in the library in the first place. Which means you have to write it, and then someone has to choose it. Libraries, books don't just show up in libraries. Someone curated that collection purposefully.
Yeah, amen. I mean, and this fits a larger narrative, sort of the deprofessionalization of teachers and librarians, that conveniently fits into this political, like the idea that these half filled out forms that betray nothing but barely literate animus against the book as an object, it seems like, can be weighed against professional judgment by people with advanced degrees is absurd. But it fits a larger pattern. Like, everybody's these are people also, substituting the judgment of doctors, of all it, the skepticism of, frankly, very boring and hard-earned expertise is activating in this context, and we're seeing it here.
Well, I can relate to that as a medical professional in the past 2 years. One of the myths that I wanted to talk about was the myth that these, and I think that you guys have all alluded to it, the false flag that that parents are doing this to protect children. I mean, not a single child has ever been harmed by any of these books that have ever been banned. The only thing that's been harmed has been perhaps parental sensibility, whereas, on the flip side, so many lives have been saved by books featuring kids who don't normally see themselves on the page, by books that allow kids who don't necessarily really understand their identity to have a touchstone to be able to determine their identity. I feel that in the past, since my kid has entered, pre-puberty, I've realized that the price of ignorance is truly high. The price of not teaching sex education in kids, the price of rendering invisible large swaths of the population. It does huge damage to kids' mental health, which is already in crisis, in this past year. I think that flipping that, it's just such an absurd notion that they're trying to protect kids. I think that we need to really blast it from, all corners, that the hypocrisy that argument represents.
Yeah, and I love that you brought it around, because that was sort of the misconception that I wanted to address too. Because I hear that too, like, oh, it's a banned books list. Great, now these kids have a list of books that they're going to go check out from the library, and I'm like, how are they going to first know the list exists, and what library are they going to? Like, it's just this weird circular thing. But I wanted to speak specifically about what you're talking about. This notion of this is done to protect kids. I went to a school district in Southern California where we had such intense scrutiny on what we were allowed to read. A great example of that is, and I tell this story in school visits, we had a health class that was mandatory. You had to take it to graduate from high school. In our textbook, any page that mentioned sex was cut out. So we were literally not allowed to learn it existed, except to say that you should practice abstinence and have sex when you're married. So we were not allowed to learn about it at all. I went to a school district where we had very extensive book bans. I grew up in that world, so none of this is unfamiliar to me. So we were not allowed to have any, there were just a long list of books for reasons that it promoted witchcraft, that it was anti-Christian, that it was anti-white, there was all of that sort of stuff. And so here was me, this, brown, Latino who was also in the closet. And so here's what I tell kids too, is that there's this idea that these parents are putting forth that if they can hide these books, then they can prevent their kids from learning about the existence of queer people, the existence of racism, the existence of a history that has been well documented over centuries, decades and centuries or whatnot. But from my perspective, what that felt like in a junior high and a high school with that much censorship going on is I felt completely and utterly invisible. So much so that any of the stuff that I was going through, homophobia from other students, from teachers, from my counselor, one of the most homophobic people on my campus was my counselor, who blamed my feminine behavior for the reason I was getting bullied. If I just acted more like a guy, I wouldn't get bullied. And so what it told me then is, oh, I don't want to see you. We're never going to deal with any of the stuff that you're going through. Don't tell anyone. And so I like to flip the script and say, oh, you want to protect kids. You are literally making children's lives more dangerous. You're going to have kids, like you said, dealing with mental health issues. You are, and I get very direct. I say you are most likely going to be the indirect cause of a kid taking their life, especially trans and queer kids who are forced back into the closet. I'm very, forthright about that. Like that is the headspace that I was in junior high and high school, which was in this environment of you do not tell anyone the things that you're going through, and there is no support for anyone like myself. And so, yeah, I try to flip that script as much as possible. You're not protecting anyone. You are literally harming kids.
Ashley, I think you wanted to jump in. Totally jump in. Come on.
Okay. Well, I think that this is just a vital, I think a vital talking point. And I think that when we can center students, when we can center kids, real kids, what are they really going through? What are they experiencing? What do they need to know about the world that they are entering in a few short months or years, right? And I think that one of the areas where it's very important to stop the bullshit, be very clear, but hang on a second, is when those attacking diverse narratives talk about children. And Robin pointed out earlier that we need materials that address all kinds of issues that span the spectrum from kindergarten to 12th grade, right? But many times these individuals are distorting the presence of books in high schools and presenting them as materials made available to kindergartners and first graders. That is not even just a rhetorical strategy. In McKinney, a parent manipulated a situation by taking her third grader to the high school library and checking out books from the high school library and then saying that the books were available to young children. And so this is, the degree to which it's disingenuous, it is stunning. And also, if we can say, what do you know about kids? What can they see on your television? What can they see on their smartphone or their best friend's smartphone at the back of the bus or after soccer practice? And say, if we are worried about inappropriate content, school libraries are not the greatest threat to young people. School libraries are where young people have the chance to engage with issues that matter to them with support, with the time to absorb and contend with the material. And I think that Eileen pointed out, these books don't harm kids in part because they can close them. So, I never pretend Out of Darkness is an easy book for readers. It's not light. It's not fun. It's not for someone who's looking for a breezy romance, right? For some kids, they may get 5 pages in and close it and say, actually, no. And that's what we want. We want kids to have that agency. But when you remove the opportunities for young people to actually discern what they are interested in, what they are drawn to, what they are ready for, we're really confining and constraining and limiting not just their education, but their maturation, their movement towards adulthood. And I think that when I talk to banned book clubs, which is the only interaction with students I've had since this all started, I haven't been invited anywhere, not to any schools. I think that one of the things we talk about is the immaturity of the adults bringing these challenges. Truly, the young people ages 13 to 17 who are organizing these book clubs display maturity and critical acumen that far outstrips that of the people saying that they have the insight to know what's safe or not safe for adolescents. I want to say one last thing, if I can, which is just that the degree to which people are bringing these challenges apart from any potential impact on their own children. Several folks have mentioned, often in the case of at least 2 of the removals of Out of Darkness, the people bringing the removals did not have children or students in any school where the book was available. And in one case, the woman bringing the challenges had kids who had graduated from the schools where my book was available. So her students were there for 4 years, somehow unharmed by the presence of Out of Darkness. Yet in this political moment, when books have been turned into targets, ways of pushing back against the very presence. You can't say, I don't want queer and Black and brown kids in my kid's school, but you can hold up a book and talk about it as filth and draw attention to whose story it is. So there's a reason that this is happening, and that reason is not concern about kids. And as you pointed out, the evidence all points to these kinds of removals stripping away essential resources and representations that the most marginalized kids need. And those are the kids most likely to depend on school libraries, the kids who don't have bus fare to the public library, the kids who don't have a credit card to order on Amazon, the kids who are working a job or have kids of their own. So the sort of fierceness I feel when I think about my former high school students and what they would have done with the books that are available now, and the fact that those are the very books disappearing from shelves, it really fires me up.
I just want to tag into that and be more fired up and say that often what happens, so these are children as being used as decoys for these political conversations, and people like me and people like all of us being used as decoys for these political conversations, which kind of sucks. But there's this notion that parents think that they somehow own their children, and they don't. They don't. They are caring for new beings in the world who own themselves, who are themselves. Ownership is not part of it. And where that I see that come up is that there's often this attempt at a concession. Well, what you do with your children is okay, but the public school has to be public. And I do not fall for that line, because the kid who, it's okay to keep the information from that kid, that's one of the kids who needs that information. That's one of the kids who are being held from themselves, being held from information. And no, that is not acceptable to do to anyone, including your own children. I'm fired up.
That's so well said too, because there is in grabbing the mantle of owning of child. I mean, that's the right word. That parents who don't share that approach to other human beings in the world, our agency as parents is erased. Like the choices we're making, when all of a sudden if as a parent is inevitably a precursor to a statement about a book ban, then, well, I have children. I have 2 children. I am a parent. How do I? It's a thing we have to push back at really strongly. Another part of this conversation that I sort of begin to notice as a publisher that I think fits into this matrix is sometimes the idea of age appropriate content is a kind of a force field. It has the sound of science to it. It has the sound of authority to it, and it somewhat ironically, given their distrust of people who actually know about children's literature, like, oh, this is not age appropriate, where they very smoothly conflate literacy, with the ability to actually parse the words in the sentences, and that sort of age appropriateness with content. And those two things don't go together. Like you could have a very boring no sex and violence sentence that's not age appropriate simply because it's structurally too complex, but they've smushed those together. And the idea, and this I think goes with what Ashley said too, about like the conflation of, like, as though the libraries, the kindergarten library and the high school library in one space is just alpha by author. The idea that age appropriateness even exists for teenagers, as though there's a such thing as a YA reading level. I see that, like, that pseudoscience repeated when people bring it up with some of the and I think unfortunately, I think libraries sometimes feel like they can use this as an escape hatch on a challenge when a book like Genderqueer, which is not a young adult book simply for publishing reasons, not for any sort of scientific reasons. It's an adult book, so must not be appropriate for younger readers. And we see that kind of categorization, which is well-meaning and sort of structural to our industry, weaponized in these bans, as though there was some sort of force of developmental psychology implicit in the young adult label, when there's not. And I think that's a place where we have to push back, that there's when I choose to publish a book as young adult, that is not some sort of, there's no science behind that, and it should never be used against a sort of middle grade novel or anything else like that. But I see that feels like it's in the arsenal now.
I think you are all touching on some pretty incredible things. But in many ways, the people who would like to take books away from folks are weaponizing all of these tools that publishers and authors and librarians use. I think I've seen that very clearly with, like, the forms and how they are sending them en masse to schools identical. The McKinney folks, they 282 in identical, just the book name changed. But what I'm wondering if you guys can talk a little bit about what you need from the librarians and the educators out there. We talk a lot about what authors give to kids, but what do you need from this field? What kind of support? What kind of information? I was shocked to find out that nobody told you when your books were banned.
Yeah. I mean, I feel really bad asking for help from librarians and teachers because they are our heroes. They are the ones that are our biggest champions. And what I want from my librarians is for them to stay sane, is for them to stay brave. Because it's really hard. I mean, I had a really heartbreaking conversation with one of my local librarian friends, and she was experienced, I think, the same sort of burnout that doctors felt during the pandemic, when they felt like they were being unjustly vilified, when, I mean, they're being called child abusers, lawsuits are being filed against them. There's nothing that I need from my librarian other than for them to just stay infused with the love of books, and for them to hold in their heart and be constantly aware of the lives that they are changing with each book that they put in the right kids' hands. There's nothing, the fear that I think that is the fear for their jobs that so many of my teacher and librarian friends are experiencing right now is just heartbreaking. And so what I want of them is for them to stay whole through this and to not leave the profession for them to realize that that not all heroes wear capes, and they are incredible.
I guess I would just add to that, that, yeah, it's a frightening time to be working in schools and doing this work, but if that's the climate, and if adults are feeling that, how are kids feeling, and how are young people feeling? Because these same messages that are making schools feel, unsafe for teachers and librarians doing this work are also getting through to the kids. And, I think that needs to be kept to front and center, that we know what kinds of things keep kids safe, and it's not keeping information from them. It's not making them feel invisible. It's not having them grow up in schools like we did, where we never heard LGBTQ plus people, for example, being talked about or acknowledged. And at the same time, I think it's not so much teachers and librarians that I feel like I need something from. It's broader than that. I think, I would like all the parents who want their kids to have an inclusive education, who want their kids to have access to all kinds of books, who want their kids to see themselves represented and learn about people whose lives look different than theirs. I would like those parents to be speaking up proactively and telling their schools administrators, their librarians, that that's important to them, so that when a parent does step up to challenge a book, that librarian has heard from 50 parents saying, I really appreciate the effort you've made to have a lot of, diverse books in your library. Or my kid came home and said that, that they had read this book today, which really made a big difference to them. And I would like those librarians and teachers to have, folders full of letters and saved emails from parents speaking up in support of books. And I think the same for kidlit writers. I would like it not to be just those of us whose books are being challenged that are having these conversations, but for the kidlit writers whose are still getting school visits and whose books are not getting challenged, to be speaking up about why this is important. So yeah, that's just my 2 cents.
I don't hear from librarians when my book is banned. And sometimes I do, or challenged, and I don't know what to do with that information when a librarian comes to me. I don't believe in the ban. I agree with you, but I can't change it. I want librarians to know that the National Coalition Against Censorship is there. PEN America is there. The ALA's OIF is there. Those are the folks who have resources for you. Those are the folks you should be reaching out to. Find your peers now, because there are lots of librarians who are in places that are not really safe for them to speak out. Figure out who has your back and get that policy in place. It may not get everything, but like Eileen said, we want you to protect yourselves. And the best way you can protect yourself is that it not be you on the line if a challenge should come your way.
I'll go. I want to throw in a little chaos. I want more chaos. And here's how I'm going to throw chaos. So, my first book, Anger is a Gift, is about police violence and protesting in schools. And so I meet with a lot of kids to talk about it. And I mean, here's the thing. I have been hearing for years about how unrealistic the book is because kids are not involved with activism. And I'm like, that just tells me you don't know kids. And I tell the story a lot. It's one of my favorite things I have ever heard, because I visited this school in California where the kids were like, oh, we had our own protests recently too. And so the suggestion that I'm going to say is I don't need librarians to do this, but if you are in a place where you're comfortable and you have support, I want more malicious compliance. I want you to take these rules and follow them so much to the letter that you flood the opposing side with so much annoyance that they give up. And so the example I'm going to give is these students had this awful rule that it was created in conjunction with a group of resource officers who are, if you're not familiar with resource officers, they're usually from the local police force who are a permanent presence on campus. And basically, as a safety measure, students were not allowed to use backpacks. They had to use clear bags so you could see what was in them all the time. And so the students, on the first day that the rule was instituted, used any device that was not a backpack in order to bring things to school. So they were using suitcases, they were using like band gear, people were using IKEA bag, like anything. And it just became this overnight thing that they did as a way of like, okay, we can't use the thing we absolutely need to get through the school day. Cool, we're going to do it. Within a week, the rule was gone. Now, I'm not saying that you're going to get that exact same response. I also think there's a beauty of the power of the collective chaos of children that we just can't match as adults. But I am seeing things where I've seen a few librarians talking about, like, if these policies go into place, they're going to ask some of their kids to file complaints about all sorts of books like Romeo and Juliet, which glorifies suicide. And we're going to, we can't teach this book until the point that there's nothing left. It's to sort of make this point. I don't think it's always going to work, but I'm just going to throw that out there. I would love to see a little bit more chaos directed back at them. Let's throw them off their game. This is a large, organized, or not large. It is a very vocal. It is not a lot of people. Let me take that back. It is a very organized, vocal minority who is doing this. Let's overwhelm them back because we have the numbers.
Is there time for one last perspective? Okay. I really love all of that. And I think that I recently wrote a thing for the American Association of School Librarians. So I actually have these like sort of thoughts of like the messages for school librarians. But I think that, I really like trickster tactics. So I think that what Mark was talking about, like some really concrete things that have come up as strategies in places where the books have been removed, is finding ways to make the banned books present. So an art history teacher in Texas created these tiny books, representations of all the books that had been banned in Leander, and creating different ways to display those and allow kids to ask, where can they get that? So, one of the things that I feel for librarians is that they have to assess their situation, where they are in their career, what their level of vulnerability is in terms of if they have union representation, all of that, what they know about the climate in their school. And those librarians who are in super supportive environments can go the extra mile for banned authors. They can be the ones bringing them in for visits, right? Because they know that they have the support for that kind of conversation. And then librarians who are in the crosshairs of these groups can decide what level, like how they hold their stand in a way that is safe for them. So one of the things that conversations I've had with librarians is, those librarians who frankly aren't afraid of being fired can do things like create a placeholder on the bookshelf where the book should be, right? Like actually like print out a cover, put it on the shelf, wrap it around foam. And then there is a thing to have a conversation about. And doing things like that, even having a poster that just has images of books that have been banned in that physical library or in other places, creates openings. And librarians can make choices about how they position those things and what they feel. Can they hand kids a pamphlet that says, you can't get these books here, but here are all the ways you can get them. So I love the trickster tactics. And also I think, as Eileen was saying, we need to absolutely stand with librarians to keep themselves healthy and whole. And sometimes that means defining a stand that they can hold in whatever setting they're working with. But I think that to maintain our sense of integrity as professionals in whatever aspect of writing or getting books into kids' hands that we do, we have to first know what our positive stand is. Not just, I don't want books to be removed from my library, or I don't want to be somebody's target in this political fight, but I want to be the person who awakens a love of reading in every kid who walks through the library doors. And when librarians can articulate that positive stand, then I think it's more possible to decide, okay, what in my situation can I do to live out that stand? And I think we are partners with librarians and, want to stand with you all. And I'm grateful that there are resources like Every Library to support you in the parts of the fight that we don't know how to fight.
That is really terrific. I think Andrew had one. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, if there's still time, I just want to say from a publisher's point of view, I would love for librarians to feel like they can ask us for help with very specific things with books. I know Penguin Random House and other publishers have begun assembling databases of supporting materials to help in cases where there are challenges. But in addition to the trickster tactics, let's go with some capitalism tactics. I mean, if you can say to a publisher, look, this book which circulates, this book which had curriculum adoption is about to go away because it's the midterms. That's like, that is motivating. And you can also add to the fact that like publishers hate this. This is like not just in a capitalistic sense of way, like this is our work, that is, you know, our life's work behind the scenes, putting these books together. To see it damaged in this way is heartbreaking. So you know, if you have any connection to the publishing house, let them know. If you don't have a connection, find one. Let's all, in a way that maybe we have never before, be unified in a full-throated opposition to that. And I think what Mark said is 100% true. We're the larger number. There are way more of us, and our historical disinclination to take this seriously, see Celebrate Freedom, Read a Rand Book t-shirts, and our focus on other issues is being used against us. As soon as that stops, they're going to hit a wall. So let's build a wall.
I would add one last thing, and what I would say is that one thing that librarians can do is to harness the power of their kids' obsession with TikTok. We all know that Book Talk sells books. And I'm pretty sure a banned Book Talk would also sell books, because nothing cooler to a kid than a book that they're not allowed to read. And I think that harnessing that would be groundbreaking. And I'm sure that it would annoy a lot of adults too.
Okay. Any last thoughts? Because I'm totally going to have to wrap us up. You guys, this has been extraordinary. I'm really grateful for the time. Ashley, Mark, Alex, Robin, Andrew, Eileen, thank you. Thank you so much. I think I have to bring John back. And back to you.
I'm here. Look at that.
You're here.
Hey, team, thank you very much. This has been a humbling thing to listen to. The fact that there's been this kind of attack on your livelihood is offensive to me. The fact that there's been such powerful moments coming out of this challenge environment for you as humans, connecting with your readers and connecting with the librarian community is just edifying. Thank you for spending some time with Every Library tonight to talk about this. I want to invite everybody who's been watching tonight. We do have our banned bookstore. The authors here assembled, their books are up there, along with things that they love, and like Andrew, helping to recommend other things as well. Bannedbookstore.co. And if you want to take an action, folks, if you want to get involved in this personally, if you've been motivated by this conversation tonight to do something, Every Library is a political action committee. You know, the emphasis on action. The committee part's all of us together. The political part is where solutions happen in these big policy challenges. Please go to action.everylibrary.org/banning. Sign the petition. It'll go to your elected officials, and it'll put you into our networks. We're stronger together, as we've been saying tonight. Tasslyn, thank you for moderating. The whole team today, thank you for sharing from your heart and your experience. We'll look forward to the next time together, folks. Good night.